It's funny, you know, you read this story and you think, oh, my God, how couldn't you see this? How couldn't you see this? But you've lived all the way through this. We've had other people on the sofa who've gone through similar things. When you're in it, it is so convincing because these guys are good.
These con men are so clever, totally convincing. And, of course, in retrospect, I can see exactly how he enacted his ploy and how he set it up.
So it started when you were about 51. I think you got itchy feet. You moved to a small town in Gloucestershire. Why did you decide to up sticks and move somewhere else?
In the previous 5 years, I'd gone through a divorce. Both my parents had died. My children had left home, and then I was made redundant. And I decided I just wanted to start a new life somewhere else and have a bit of an adventure. And
you got a job, and you got to integrate yourself with everybody.
Yes.
It's all looking quite good. And then in the shop, in he walks.
Yes, one evening I'd been living in Gloucestershire for about 18 months. Was feeling very happy. Friends said I was living the dream. And yes, he just walked in at about 5 o'clock one evening.
And there was an instant connection between you both, obviously, and you remember him lingering around the shop for quite a while, so he was interested in you as well, and you exchanged numbers. There was a bit of texting that evening.
That's correct.
And you went for a date the following night. But even at that stage, if you didn't return his text quick enough, he was straight on the phone to you that evening, so there was a lot of flirtation and interest.
He was very, very attentive, very flirtatious, charming, extremely entertaining. And yes, quite demanding.
Mm. And so it snowballed from there. You know, this is a guy who was, as you say, charming, took care of you, and so eventually it moved quite quickly. You moved in. So what were the circumstances of him persuading you that you should move into what was a very grand house?
He said that it was imperative that we live together in order to be able to spend more time with each other. He'd said right from the evening I met him that it would be 18 months before he could be in a proper full-time relationship because of work commitments. At that time, I thought he was a Swiss banker, and he subsequently confided in me that he worked as an agent for MI6, and he persuaded me to give up my job, move into a very grand house. I was totally convinced that he was very wealthy, and I was swept off my feet.
I thought a lot of people would say, especially, and I don't know how many MI6 agents watched this morning. Of course, they would never tell anybody. But there aren't many incredibly rich MI6 agents, unless you watch James Bond, who appears to be very rich, but they don't have a lot of that sort of thing.
This is true. I mean, I did say it was like something out of James Bond, but he did take me to the MI6 building one afternoon. He said he'd been called in by his boss and he was in trouble over his relationship with me. And somehow he disorientated me. We drove past the building and I saw him go into what looked like an underground car park, which I believed was an entrance to the MI6 building, past 2 armed guards.
How did he manage to get £850,000 from you?
Very stealthily. Again, I think there probably was a staged telephone call that I overheard, that I was meant to overhear, talking about a cash flow problem. And he was renovating a couple of properties in Bath, so I believed, and one that we were going to live in, not the one that I did actually live in, but another one. And, of course, that was my cue to say, well, I've got some money in the bank, I can help you out, because I'd sold my house in Buckinghamshire before I moved to Gloucestershire.
And he obviously took this money and you carried on drip feeding him for quite a period after that then?
Yes, for about 3 months.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about living the dream and your friends thinking that as well, but there you were in this big house. But actually at that stage, you were seeing less of him than you did when you were living separately at the beginning. And at one point you felt terribly desolate and very, very alone throughout this whole period.
I was completely isolated, and the living the dream comment actually referred to my life before I met him. You know, I was living in a small cottage, I had a job, I was settled.
But you were in this big house with supposedly this man that you were in love with, so that's also part of it, I assume, so it wasn't that case at all.
That was like an adventure, but it soon turned very, very sour.
Yeah.